Hi, I'm Maggie Swanborn, and I'm doing my honors research project on gun violence and the Second Amendment. I chose this topic for a number of reasons, one of the main ones being that I attended the March for Our Lives protest in 2018 with my mom and my sister, and I was really inspired by the teens who spoke at the event and had a lot of knowledge on this topic. And I saw the honors research project as the perfect opportunity for me to gain that knowledge as well. I'm also interested in public policy and government and possibly pursuing that as a career. And gun violence is a very contentious topic within politics right now and probably will be for a long time. So I was excited to gain this knowledge for that reason as well. There are also many theories about gun violence in America and how we can solve it. So I thought it was really beneficial to look at that on my own and look at all kinds of resources and really be able to decipher for myself what I believe and what I believe is best for our country. My thesis. The gun culture created as a result of the Second Amendment has normalized the use of guns in daily life, creating a society that is numb to the effects of gun violence. So after the Revolutionary War, there was a lot of fear about having a central government with too much power or a tyrannical government like the colonies had just experienced with Britain. So something that they really valued was militias. And militias were a group of men at the time who had the ability to come together and fight for the town, the colony, the state, in the case of a government that became too powerful. So this fear is obviously still very much alive within the US today. And personally, I think that although it's a very valid fear, we let it hinder progress we could be making a little too much. But it explains why the Second Amendment is written the way it is and why it is such a big part of American culture. James Madison wrote the Second Amendment, and he's quoted on both sides of the argument, but this quote kind of explains what his intentions were when writing it. So based on the obligation of citizens band together as a militia to defend the common good, as opposed to the prerogative of citizens to take up arms individually in pursuit of self-interest and happiness. Basically what he's saying is that although this right is given to the individual to own a gun, it's more so for the greater good in case of a tyrannical government so that citizens can band together to help one another. It's not necessarily about self-protection the way it is often seen today. The gun debate can be so confusing because of how vague the Second Amendment really is, and that's why the interpretation can be taken so many different ways, and so many different historians and scholars see it differently. On one side, people believe that the Second Amendment outlines the rights that the citizens have to own militia more so than the individual right to own a gun, and some people see it as the other way around. One thing that a lot of historians want to make sure is clear is that a militia is very different than like a trained SWAT team. It is about civilians, and that the word people in the Second Amendment does not necessarily refer to the individual citizen and the reason an individual might want to own guns. It's more so about everyone having access to guns in case the country as a whole needs it. So there's two Supreme Court cases that involve the right to bear arms and are often cited in the debate. The first one being U.S. versus Cruikshank. the court decided that the federal government cannot protect people from the private infringement of their rights to assemble and bear arms. And although um, this case does relate to the right to bear arms and the Second Amendment, it's more so about federalism and the rights that the state and the federal government have. The most significant Supreme Court verdict in the debate of the Second Amendment is U.S. versus Miller, and the case involved two individuals transporting an unregistered shotgun of less than regulation length across state lines. And the Supreme Court decided that because that shotgun cannot be used in a militia, it was not covered by the Second Amendment. And so that's a very significant win for people in favor of gun control. The Supreme Court essentially is saying that the right to bear arms directly relates to a militia. You simply cannot talk about gun culture in America without talking about the National Rifle Association, or the NRA. It has 3.4 million members and an estimated budget of $230 million, which is very significant and shows why they're one of the most influential lobbyists in politics today. But the NRA actually started around this time of the Civil War to improve civilian marksmanship, and it has evolved into this large political influence that we see today. You would think that after something like a school shooting, the NRA loses popularity, but after the Sandy Hook school shooting, only about a third of Americans thought the NRA had too much influence over the nation's gun laws. The NRA's large influence can actually be attributed to the federal government itself. Until 1979, one had to be an NRA member to buy surplus guns, meaning the government was providing a tangible incentive for gun aficionados to join. Phenomenal growth was made possible by the Defense Department. This is clear evidence of gun culture that's engraved in our government and has now transferred to American culture and society. As of late 2013, the NRA had not lost a major battle over federal gun control legislation in nearly 2 decades, according to a book called The Gun Debate. This is just an example of the NRA's large power and significance in deciding laws for a country. Some of these accomplishments of the NRA was halting government-sponsored research on the public health consequences of firearms in the 1990s, and they lifted the ban of loaded guns in national parks in 2009. They also have tremendous influence on the state and local government level, which shows how dedicated their base is and why they have so much influence. Among developed countries, the United States has the highest rate of private gun ownership. However, most Americans do not own guns. Surveys indicate that about 25% of adults age 18 and older own at least one firearm, which amounts to about 60 million gun owners in the United States. Unfortunately, we don't really have the most accurate number of how many guns are actually in our country because of a lack of registration and many off-the-book transactions. The current estimation is about 254 million firearms, which is about 4 per person, which is a lot considering only about 25% of adults actually own guns. Gun violence is definitely an issue within our country. Every day, more than 100 Americans are killed with guns, and 200 more are shot and wounded. according to gun violence in America, which it's difficult to get these numbers because there's a lack of federal funding. So a lot of organizations have tried their best to put together as much research as they can, but unfortunately without federal funding, it's hard to make that happen. 58% of American adults or someone they care for has experienced gun violence in their lifetime, which was very surprising to me because I feel like it's never talked about, which would show how, as a nation, gun violence has been normalized to a point where it's not surprising that someone might have that experience, and it's never talked about because it's no longer a huge deal, and we have become numb to such a significant event that's no longer treated the way it should be. 1/3 of gun deaths are homicides, and the US gun homicide rate is 25 times that of other high-income countries. So we also have to recognize that with this gun violence comes a lot of trauma and mental health issues, something that also needs to be corrected for, considering how many people are affected by gun violence. There are some restrictions, though, that the federal government has put on firearms. For example, it limits the possession in terms of high-risk groups. They've banned machine guns and armor-piercing ammunition, and they banned carrying firearms in airports and government buildings. Some more recent legislation. In 1993, under newly elected President Bill Clinton, Congress passed the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, named after former Vice President spokesman James Brady, who had been gravely wounded in the 1981 assassination attempt on his boss, Ronald Reagan. The law created a way to enforce prior restrictions on prohibited purchases by requiring federally licensed gun dealers, but not private sellers, to conduct a background check on would-be buyers of handguns. So this is the step in the right direction, enforcing background checks, but it does not cover private sellers, so there's a clear loophole, and someone that might not be able to get a gun with a background check is able to do that if they just go to a private seller. The Dickey Amendment shows how little we really know about guns in the country and how little is being done to learn about them. In 1996, Congress passed the Dickey Amendment, which with support from the National Rifle Association. It didn't ban federally funded gun research, but the legislation had a chilling effect. From 1996 to 2013, CDC funding in the area dropped to 96%. As a result of this amendment, we have very little research and knowledge about the effects of gun control on our country and on our citizens, and on the mental health of our citizens as well. Something I think most Americans would be able to get behind, but the National Rifle Association profits off of not having this research. So that is why they probably put in a lot of their political power into getting this passed. Public opinion is something very valuable in gauging what do Americans believe about guns and the gun culture that we currently have in America. It's very insightful. About 90% of Americans agree with the laws currently, or they think they should be stricter. About 30% of Americans are in favor of a blanket handgun ban. So obviously a disparity. On one hand, majority of Americans, sometimes overwhelming majorities, favor specific proposals not currently on the books nationally or in most states. On the other hand, when asked the general question of whether they support stricter gun laws, far lower numbers say yes, according to the gun debate. The US government has ensured that guns are woven into our history and society today. The government did little to regulate guns and even deemed state and local government restrictions on guns as unconstitutional and eventually had them overturned. The government even worked closely with and enabled the NRA, the largest and most powerful lobbyist group in our country, all because of the Second Amendment. Most Americans favor gun control but don't even realize because gun violence has been so normalized, and we've convinced individuals that gun control is unconstitutional and un-American. Thank you. This is my works cited. Thank you for listening.